welcome back everyone. It's good to see a record crowd for this. I'm not surprised because we got the star turn of, well, actually that's a bit mean on everyone else. Anyway, we've got one of the most interesting people that I've ever interviewed, so I'm really glad he could be here today to talk to you guys as well. Lewis Dartnell, he looks at the past. You don't just look 10 years back, he doesn't look 100 years back, 1,000 years back, but we're talking millions and millions of years. So my big question to you is, we live in a world where we are worried about Donald Trump declaring war in Iran. We're worried about Brexit. We're worried about inequality. We're worried about opportunities people in society. What on earth has the last 2 billion years got to do with that? How can that actually help us today?
So I think, it is of course a very good question, but I think there's a lot to be said that we can understand the details, the conditions, and the context of our present situation, of current affairs and modern geopolitics and the world that we all live in today. I think we can understand that so much better if we look to where it came from in the first place. What was the process through history of development and colonization and nation building, etc., that led up to the world we find today, and therefore the state that it's in. And particularly if we're looking at the issues we are facing at the moment with climate change, understanding how Earth's climate has changed in the past, or what created the opportunity for us as a civilization, society, to be burning all this fossil fuel, helps us prepare for the future, to find what the answers are to the questions we are now being presented with.
Because I interviewed you for my podcast, and you pointed out that where you're from in the world, some people ended up in places where there were loads of precious metals or fantastic soil, or safe, are you guarded by the English Channel from invasion, whatever it might be. So you're saying those really long time frames do matter, they shape our society.
No, they absolutely do. And I guess it's quite a straightforward, obvious point that the natural resources found in different places around the world dictate who gets the gold, or gets the iron, or gets the coal. And clearly where the coal was in the early 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s, was very important for Britain, because we were in a state in our socio-economic development where we basically chopped down all the trees, we were experiencing an energy crisis, and then realised we could dig up fossilised trees, fossilised sunshine from underground, far quicker than we could coppice natural woodland, and that then powered us through the Industrial Revolution, and then the world into the Industrial Revolution, into the world we find today. But to draw the link from the Industrial Revolution, which I think is something we're all familiar with, to the conditions that created that in the first place, something weird happened to planet Earth about 300 million years ago, where the trees thrived and they grew and they died and fell over and they refused to rot. Something had broken in the recycling system of planet Earth that created those fabulously dense deposits of coal, which we've now been digging up and burning, and then releasing all the carbon dioxide, which is now coming back to bite us with another problem. So often the patterns of history are often solving a problem created by the solution to the previous problem, and just hoping you can do it quickly enough before things start falling apart and you collapse.
So 300 million years ago, lots of trees didn't rot. 200 years ago, Britain became the Saudi Arabia of the 19th century.
We were sat on this natural deposit of energy of the coal, exactly.
And became one of the richest countries in the history of the world.
At the time, exactly.
And built all these posh buildings and...
where we are right now, the Regency era of glorious architecture.
So give me another example. So I know you've got so many, but give me another example of how the world that we see today, the patterns, the way people live, the demographics, have been affected not by decisions made by politicians and kings and queens, but by these deeper currents that sometimes not aware of.
So all of this is from the book I spent 3 years researching and writing, which is called Origins, How the Earth Made Us. And my favourite chapter from this entire book, in fact the first one I wrote, was all about how something invisible, something high above our heads, which is the great big churning currents high up in Earth's atmosphere, how that fundamentally drove the age of sail and the age of exploration from the 1400s to 1500s. So Columbus discovering the Americas, Vasco da Gama finding a route around the southern tip of Africa and into the Indian Ocean, the source of the spice trade, like fundamental turning points in European history. These are all literally driven, literally blown by these circulation currents in the atmosphere. That the air moves in particular ways, so you can only, within a sailing ship, go from point A to point B if the wind allows it. So this dictates where your trade routes emerge. This dictates where you build your fortresses and your colonies, and the whole pattern of empire building with Portugal and Spain and the Dutch and the British and the French was all basically dictated by the wind blows, and that has had a huge influence on the way the world looks today.
Because if you're living in the Caribbean 600 years ago, you literally can't sail to Africa.
You can't get back again. So the Caribbean is absolutely smack bang downwind of North Europe, North Africa. So that's why Columbus arrived in the Caribbean. He just set out towards this ocean, and the wind carried him in that direction. If you want to get back again, you have to sail north before you can pick up the conveyor belt of the winds that are blowing in the opposite direction, which are not the trade winds, but the westerlies. And so that principle of these conveyor belts of winds blowing in different directions created what was known as the Atlantic trade triangle. So around the time of the Industrial Revolution, when Britain had worked out ways of getting machines to make stuff for us, of textiles and weapons, and those were taken down to North Africa where they were sold. And then the empty ships were then filled with forced human labour, with slaves who were kidnapped from the West African coastline, forced into the ships, taken across on the trade winds to the colonies in North America and Brazil, forced to work on the plantations around those colonies, growing raw materials like cotton and sugar and coffee, and tea, things we just take for granted today, but that was all grown by slave labour in that period of history. And then the product of that slave labour was taken back along the westerly winds to Northern Europe and Britain, where it was sold. The cotton was then turned by the machines into textiles, which were taken back down to West Africa to sell for slaves. So you had this cog in the ocean that was being blown round and round by the winds, generating huge profits for Britain and the slave masters and Europe at the time, at great human suffering. So that was the cost of the early period of Industrial Revolution. It wasn't machinery and coal, it was human labour that powered it in the beginning and creating conditions for needing machinery. So that's, I think, just one good example of how the kind of currents of history, if you like, were being directed and influenced by just a factor of the planet, of something on Earth that we take for granted, that you can't even see if you look out with the currents in the atmosphere.
And going beyond that, the settlement of North America. So 500 years ago, North America was inhabited by the indigenous peoples of North America. Now it's full of other people.
It is, yeah.
And that's not an accident. That's part of this great cycle as well.
Well, I'd say that this is another, darkly stained period of human history, and particularly Western European history of colonising the Americas. These were not empty lands. This was not virgin territory. It was populated, and it was then forcibly depopulated. I say it's a very unpleasant period of history, and a lot of that was driven by, the economic means of getting goods that had been grown in the eastern coast back across to Europe. The Spanish were operating at a trade route called the Manila Galleon route, right across the Pacific, the greatest ocean on Earth. And the reason that California became so critical and crucial in history is simply that is the only place you can get to when you're crossing the Pacific from China. You sail across to China, you buy the silk and the porcelain and stuff that people in Europe want, you sail across the Pacific, the only place you can get to is California, so that's where you need places to rewater your ships or stock up with provisions. So cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, they were created because that's where the wind blows the ships. Like something I say as profound as that just comes down to the atmosphere.
And what does all that work you do, that's all fascinating stuff, but how does it affect the way that we make decisions and should live our lives and plan for the future today?
Well, see, I think, I'm being too po-faced, I think by understanding where we've come from and therefore where we are today, but beyond what you see on Twitter or in the newspapers or whatever, I think having that deeper understanding, which we all get by studying subjects like history at school, it shows you more than what is immediately in front of you. It shows you where things came from. It shows you the reasons why things are we find them today. It perhaps warns us of not repeating the mistakes of history, although invariably we always do. I think one of the greatest lessons of history is no one ever learns from history. We just do it with slightly better technology and then stumble blindly back into similar situations again and again.
And you are an academic who is now famous for working right across all these different subjects. You're actually, alarmingly, this guy's so clever. He's actually a Mars specialist. But what is that? Is that very satisfying? Like working across all these different and exploring these new areas?
Yeah. So I'm actually from a biology background. I pretend to be a historian nowadays. I'm a fake historian. But my actual research field at university is in a very new field called astrobiology, which is all about looking at the possibility of there being life beyond the Earth. So I take what we understand about life on Earth, how it got started, the conditions we think it needs to survive under, and then look to see if those conditions exist on other places, on the surface of Mars, or maybe in the ocean deep beneath the surface of Jupiter's moon, Europa. And not just, is this a habitable environment? Could life be found here? But importantly, how would we find life there? What life detection kit, what experiment could you design, put on the front of Mars rover to scan for life signs, if you like, to do that kind of Star Trek type test of, no, that soil is dead, or yes, green light, there are signs of bacteria or microbial life in the soil. So that's what I do at the University of Westminster, just 10-minute cycle.
That's your day job?
In my lab. So that's my day job as an astrobiologist. And then along the side of all that, I do a lot of talks at schools and communication and writing books like Origins, which is the one we were talking about just now. My book before that is called The Knowledge, How to Rebuild a World from Scratch, which is how you could reboot civilization after an apocalypse. So imagine that The Walking Dead has actually happened, or there's been some kind of, let's say Donald Trump has pushed the reset button on the world. He's pushed the big red button on his desk. He meant to get the Coke. In fact, he pushed the nuclear Armageddon button. Everything's been knocked back to the Stone Age. How could you, as a community of survivors, progress back through history as quickly as possible? How would you build everything we take for granted in our modern lives? And I hope it should be clear, I'm not some kind of doomsday prepper. I don't have the end of the world is nigh placard around my chest. But I think that thought experiment of how we got to here today, how we could go through that process again more quickly, is a great way of looking behind the scenes of the modern world, of modern civilization. What were the key scientific discoveries and technological inventions through history that created the world we live in today, but also had these huge, transformative redirections in the course of history? The invention of the printing press, the invention of the harbour process in chemistry, these all fundamentally changed society and the way people live. And it's just words on a textbook nowadays.
So, as a scientist who's come into the humanities a bit more recently, what are the skills that you've enjoyed learning, that you've enjoyed exploring, that the humanities, that politics, that philosophy, that history can give you?
Yes, I think in many ways, doing science and doing history research are very, very similar to each other. You have a body of evidence. We'd call it data. You guys call it source material. So stuff that exists, stuff that's been written, or information you get by doing an experiment, and then you analyse it and you think logically and you try to think, how does this best fit with our idea of history or our hypothesis in science? How does that advance what we know? How does that... You might find a new source material that would contradict the current theory. You might have a new experiment that throws up data that contradicts what you... So it's all about understanding the world by being open to changing your mind if there's sufficient reason to do so, and knowing the best ways of looking for those reasons or for that source material or evidence.
Fantastic. Now, I'm sure there'll be some questions for Lewis. Anyone got any questions, let me know. If not, there's a microphone coming round. If not, I will ask another question. Feel free to jump in at any... Go on then. Here we go.
Can I ask
here we go. Microphone coming.
Thank you. You said about your book. In terms of the key dates to allow us to survive. Could you sum up? What do you think are maybe the one thing that fundamentally changed, or for the better or for the worse?
In the whole of history?
Well, yeah, in terms of that in that summary, if you're saying this is the book or these are the ideas that allows you to get through this apocalypse, and you're saying this is what we would need to do again, but would we want to do all of those things again? Yeah. That's what I was thinking. So is there one that you think, this is the key one, or the one thing that we shouldn't do?
Yeah, so in the chapters of The Knowledge, I look at all the different sectors of stuff that we use today, whether that is communication or transport or medicine or chemistry, and show you how you can go right from the basics of literally walking out into your back garden, digging a rock up and knowing how to turn that rock to get the metal out if it's an iron ore rock, or to slake it to make lime, which you can then make mortar or concrete to build stuff with. And then each chapter is kind of looking through history of how you get more and more complex, building on what you've done already, and then linking things together to basically play Minecraft for real. Like, the history of civilization is basically Minecraft but for real. Knowing where to go to in the natural world to get the stuff that you need and how to transform it in its raw state and into what you need. So some of the key discoveries, some of the things you would hope would never be lost to history again, might be something like the idea of germ theory. So the reason people get sick isn't because they've pissed off some god. It's not because there's bad air, malaria. It's because there are things which are so small, you can't see them, we call them germs, and they get inside your body and they make you sick. And if you sneeze and those small things pass from you to Dan, then Dan gets sick. So imagine all of the thousands of years of history of people just not getting something really basic because they couldn't build a microscope to see these things for themselves. From one of the projects for the Knowledge, I went and did the ultimate Robinson Crusoe experiment, which is making glass from scratch in a single day on the same beach. Because all the things you need for glass are sand, soda ash, which you can get from seaweed, and slate lime, which you can get from chalk, coral, or limestone. You can make glass on a beach yourself, and then shape that into a lens that will act as a microscope to show you germs and bacteria. So I love that idea of if only people knew, the Romans could have built a microscope, if only they'd known what to do with the glass, rather than making wine bottles out of it, they could have made a microscope, and we'd have had 2,000 years, supposedly, of germ theory and people not dying in their droves by basically eating their own poo, which is what was happening when you put sewage into the River Thames, and tens of thousands of people have died of cholera every year, until the 1850s, 1860s, when we started doing sewage and then building pipes to put the poo into.
Right. Well,
Don't eat poo. Eating poo is an awful idea.
Yeah, bad idea. So have we got, when NASA give you a shout and say, right, we're just tooling up, we're going to Mars, have you got everything? Have you got a flat pack kit of everything you need for Mars life, or have we got to invent some more stuff?
You know what, mate? I love Mars. It's our next door neighbour planet. I'm very supportive of other people wanting to go to Mars.
Yeah.
I would not go near it myself. So a mission to Mars, to go there and back again, is a minimum of 2 years. 2 years of living in something the size of a caravan, drinking your own recycled urine. That's the only way you get drinking water. Arguing with people, can you imagine, even people you are best mates with, being in something the size of a caravan for 2 weeks and still liking them by the end of it?
But could we survive on Mars with what we've got at the moment? You put up a nice, you just Matt Damon it.
So we're going back to poo again, aren't we?
Yeah.
This has been quite a theme of our chat,
Yeah.
and I can only apologise. I think that's probably my fault. I think it's fair to say that we've got the technological understanding of keeping people alive in the near term on the surface of Mars. We understand the machinery, because we did this on the International Space Station already. The problem is making it reliable enough, because if something breaks down on the International Space Station, you hop in a lifeboat, you come back down to the Earth within a matter of hours. If you're on the surface of the Moon and something goes wrong, you're a long weekend away from help. If you're on Mars and something goes wrong, you are 6 months, a year away from help. But there's a huge jump from a few days to months or a year. And it's that kind of reliability of the technology that we need to focus. So one of my PhD students in the lab is working on a project of how you can use algae as part of a biological life support system to grow and make oxygen to breathe, to make food, because growing algae is much easier than growing crops and certainly easier than growing pigs and cattle on a Mars base.
So you're eating algae, you're drinking your urine, you're eating algae.
I'm not making it sound all that glamorous.
You're not, actually. I'm changing my...
So I would go into space. I would go for a short, let's say a week's holiday on an orbital hotel around the Earth, looking down.
That's very generous of you.
I would not go to Mars.
Okay, good. Bear that in mind, everyone. Anyone else got a question? Can be about anything, Mars? Yes, go for it, buddy. There you go, microphone coming.
Anything but poo.
We've got a couple of minutes left.
Do you think the problems that developing countries have today are a result of colonial exploitation, or are they a geographical problem?
Good question.
Great question, and the answer is kind of yes to both. So the Western powers have been enormously exploitative of the places they colonised and built the empires around. And there's still a lot of it going on today. So China at the moment is buying up a lot of mines and natural resources in Africa. And they are building hospitals and schools and roads. They're also taking all of the natural resource they need for themselves out of places. So the same sort of shady practice is still going on. It's just being done by different nations now. And I wonder to what extent within kind of human behaviour, the stronger will always try to take advantage of the weak. And that's where civilization and society and laws come in.
But there is also, Mali is just a very environmentally marginal place, for example, northern Mali. So there is your other part of your theory, there are some places in the world that it's difficult to develop, to enrich.
Yeah, if most of your national area is over the Sahara Desert, there's very little you can do with that, unless perhaps you start putting solar panels in them and selling the sunshine electricity to people that want to buy it. So with every new technology, some opportunities disappear. No one really cares about bronze anymore, that technological age is past. people care a lot about silicon and solar panels and computer chips now, and solar electricity. So with every new technological change, it changes the balance of opportunities and advantages for different nations.
Well, we've got to stop there, unfortunately. I told you he'd be good. That was awesome, wasn't it? Thank you very much, Lewis Dartnell. That was great. Thank you.